Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Menachos Memvav, Menachos 46, but we're going to get started on the last line of Menhei Amabez 45b, continuing our discussion from yesterday. Yesterday we were discussing a dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanas about the bread, the two loaves of bread that are brought on Shavuos, and it's accompanied by 7 sheep as an olah and 2 sheep as a shlamim. So Rabbi Akiva says that if you don't have the bread, you can't bring the sheep. The bread prevents the sheep from being brought, but the sheep don't prevent the bread. And Banana says the opposite. The sheep prevent the bread, but the bread doesn't prevent the sheep. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Modim, both Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanas agree, we're on the top of 46a, Shem Huska Kuzel, that if the bread and the sheep were together, then Shem Akvin said. Then at that point, we're on top of Navav Manaf, that at that point they're both Ma'akiv each other. That if you don't have one, you can't do the other. Rashi says, if they're together and then you lost the bread or the sheep, Shema Akvan Zolatzev, Anoser Fanenu Yotzel Beis Asrefa, the Nidcheb the Ibud Chavero. It's lost. And if once they were together, you can't bring the other one. Hizu Zika, what is this connection, Sholan? So the Gemara says that's the Shlita, that's the slaughter. Once there was the slaughtering of the sheep, then you need both, or else you can't bring one without the other. Amr Ula, Bo B'Marava. They asked the question in Eretz Yisrael, Tenufa. So by the Shtei Lechem, by the 2 loaves of bread, there's 2 wavings. There's a waving beforehand and a waving afterwards. After the sheep are slaughtered, you wave the sheep beforehand. So Tenufa. So Rashi actually says that the bread was waved twice. The Rambam says the bread was waved once, but the Rashi says here that kvasim hayumanifim imalacham yichayim, that you would take the 2 sheep and you would wave them with the bread while they were alive. So Ula says in Eretz Yisrael, they asked the question, since this tenufa was before the shlita, is the tenufa osazika or eno osazika? Does the tenufa bring them together to say that they're ma'akev each other or not? So Gemara says, well, Pashalei the Rabbi Yochanan. Why don't we answer Ula's question from Rabbi Yochanan? Because what did Rabbi Yochanan say? The Rabbi Yochanan shlita osazika. He says the slaughtering is what brings them together. We call the tenufa eno osazika. This proves that the waving, which is prior to the slaughtering, does not bring them together. The Gemara says, no, the Rabbi Yochanan gufa coming by away. No, we're asking the question about Rabbi Yochanan itself. Do we say mifsha pshitale Rabbi Yochanan the shlita osazika? Was it obvious to Rabbi Yochanan that the shlita is what brings them together, makes the zika? Utenufa eno zika, and therefore the tenufa does not. Well, dilma shlita pshitale utenufa mesafle, or maybe that was his question. It's obvious to me, says Rabbi Yochanan, that the shlita makes a zika, but maybe the tenufa does not make a zika. So the Gemara says, we leave this question unresolved. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina, Rav Huna braid Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina says to Rav Huna braid Rabbi Yeshua, "V'haki ksiv, how could this be? How could this be? Kodesh Yu Hashem la Kohen." It says in the pasuk that we said in yesterday's daf also, it says, Kodesh Yu Hashem, it will be holy to Hashem, la Kohen. So we see from here that it says the Kohen shall wave them on the bread as a wave offering for the 2 sheep, and it will be Kodesh for Hashem or Kohen, which means when it says Yu, which we said yesterday means it's Me'akev, it's essential, Basar Tenufa Ksiv. That's written after the word Tenufa. And still, Upligi Ben Nanas Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nanas Rabbi Akiva are arguing if the word Yu teaches us that the bread is required or that the sheep are required. And so we see from here that after the Tenufa, they're still having the argument. So it's obviously the case that the Tenufa is not Ma'akev. So does not make a zika. So the Gemara says, but there's a flaw in your logic. Because according to your logic, basar tenufa v'lo basar shlita. According to your logic, are they only arguing after the waving, but they're also not arguing after the shlita? No, they're also arguing after the shlita because it says Yu Hashem Kohen, and the Kohen doesn't get his share until after the shlita. That's when he gets his share. And for sure, after the shlita, everybody agrees, says Rabbi Yochanan, that there's a zika between them. So therefore, it's referring it's referring backwards, meaning to say that the words Yud was not said after the Shlita. It was teaching us only before the Shlita. And so too by the My Kodesh Yu Hashem HaKohen. And what does it mean? It's Kodesh for Hashem, for the Kohen. Davar Shasofo Kohen. So then the end will be the Kohen. So it's going backwards. And so too we would say here, Achinami Davar Shasofo Kohen. We could say that it was done before the Tenufa, and it's talking about something that will eventually go to the Kohen. That's whether it's ma'akev, what's ma'akev. So now the Gemara says, "Ushlita osa zika." Is it really the case, like Rabbi Yochanan said, that the shlita is what brings them together? But we have a question from Karban Toda. We know that Karban Toda is a type of shlamim. There's an animal that's sacrificed, and 4 different types of bread are brought, 10 loaves from each, and the Kohen gets a total of 4 loaves. So the Gemara says, "V'raminu." Let's say before you brought the bread, and before it was slaughtered, nifras lachma. So the bread was broken at that point. Some of the bread broke, and now we have a problem. So at that point, yavi lacham acher v'shochet. If the bread broke, you have to bring new bread. Rashi says, achlo shachta. Rashi says, Litoda. Excuse me, I wanted to look at the next Rashi. Well, Rashi says that the bread of the, we'll read this once we started reading it. Lechem Toda, the bread of the Toda is only makes Kadesh, it only becomes sanctified when with the slaughtering. And then the next Rashi says, Nifras Lachma, if the bread broke, just bring new bread. So the Gemara says, Rashi says, Lo Yadana Minon the Mipsalul Kuhu. I don't know why if one bread breaks, they're all disqualified. He says, what's the source for this? I don't know, says Rashi. Then Rashi suggests, maybe Rashi says, I think it comes from lechem hapanim, shehi minchas toda, because that is a mincha like the toda, uksivba hi kodesh kodashim hu sheim nifrasa echa michalasa kulam psula. So just like the lechem hapanim, if one of them breaks, they're all broken. Also the bread, but before it was slaughtered, you could just bring new bread. Back to the text, we're raising the question: does shchita really do the zika? Mishashachta, but once it was slaughtered, nifras lachma. If the bread was broken, adam yizrok, the blood could be sprinkled. Ba'basar yeyachol, the meat could be eaten. Videi nidra lo yatsa, but he hasn't fulfilled the obligation. Ba'lachem pasol, and the bread is disqualified. Nizrak adam, once the blood was thrown, and then the bread broke. Torah min hashalim al paros. You can give to the Kohen from the complete ones, even though there are some broken ones. Ad shelo shachta, before it was slaughtered, yatsa lachma the bread went out of the base, out of the azar. Machnisa v'shochi. You bring it back and you slaughter it. Misha shachta yatsa lachma. If it was after it was slaughtered, the bread went out. Adam Yizrok, Vabasi Yachol, Vide Nidra Yatsa. The meat could be in, the blood sprinkled, but he didn't fulfill his obligation. The lechem pasol, and the bread is disqualified. Nidrak Adam, once the blood was sprinkled, then you could take from the blood, the bread that was inside, and it will basically exempt the ones that were outside. You could still give to the Kohen. You can't eat the ones that went out, but rather it can be counted as though it was a truma to allow the inner ones to be eaten by the Kohen. And then he has the third case, before it was slaughtered, the bread became tamei. Maybe lechem achar, bring other bread, v'shochet, and slaughter it. Misha shachta, if after it was slaughtered, the bread became nitma. Then Adam Yizrok, the blood is thrown. He'd still throw the blood, and the meat is still be eaten, and he fulfilled his vow. Because the tzitz that the Kohen Gadol wears, the golden foreplate, serves as a atonement for what's tummy. Lechem pasol, the bread's disqualified. Nizrak Adam, and if the blood is thrown, Torah min Torah al tummy. So now the Gemara asks the question: if like Rabbi Yochanan said, the shlita makes a zika, even the huskul zelas ebeshlita. If solei lechem tifsal nami todo. So we had said that once it's slaughtered, the bread became tameh, you could still eat the meat. But if you're saying that there's a shlit, that the shlita makes a zika, then you shouldn't, once the bread becomes disqualified, also the toad itself should become disqualified. That's a basic question. So the Gemara says, no, shani toda, the case of the toad is different. The Rachmana Karye Shlamim. The Torah calls it Shlamim. Ma'az Shlamim. Craven Bluach. Just like the Shlamim is brought without any bread. Avtoda Karva Bluacham. Just like the Shlamim is brought, can be brought without any bread. So too, the Toda can be brought even without the Lechem. So it's a special verse. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, we know our old friend Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I mean, not Chas v'Shalom, not being light about him. I'm just saying, Rabbi Yirmiyah always asks, like, that takes the questions to the next level. That's what I meant to say. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Im Timtzil Amar Tenufa Usazika. So remember, we had said, question, Teku, if we know the Shlita makes a Zika, but does the waving? And so that was the question that they had, and it was left as Teku. So now they said, if you would want to say that the Tenufa makes a Zika, brings the sheep and the two loaves together, avad alechem, then if you would lose the bread, then under those circumstances, avdu kavasim, then you lost the sheep once they were waved. That's obviously the case. On top of mem vavam base, avdu kvasim, if you lost a sheep, avdu lechem. Then obviously, if you lost a sheep, you lost the bread because there's a zika. The imtim tzalomar tenufa eno is a zika, but let's say you say that tenufa does not make a zika. Hevi lechem v'kvasim. Let's say you brought bread and sheep, v'hunfu, and you waved them, v'avad lechem, and then you lost the bread, v'hevi lechem acher, and you brought new bread. Also, alachem ton tenufa, eno ton tenufa. Do you need to now wave the new bread? We already waved the sheep, but you need to wave the bread. So, abdu kvasim moti bayalach. We're not asking a question about if you lost the sheep after you did the initial waving, do you have to re-wave the sheep? The Amar, the Vadai by Tenufa, for sure needs waving. Why is it for sure the case it needs waving? Because that's where the pasuk says, "Ve'nifa kohen osam," that you have to wave the sheep. And Rashi gives another explanation because the sheep, well, as we saw in yesterday's daf, when they're brought, they are going to be the matir for themselves, whereas the bread, and they're also going to matir the bread in eating. So kiti bailach. So therefore, it's only a question of avad alechem. It's only a question if you lost the bread. Valiba de Ben Nanas, according to Ben Nanas, who says that the sheep is ma'akiv the bread, and Rebbe Kiva says the bread is ma'akiv the sheep. So according to Ben Nanas, we're going to say the Amar Kvasim Ikar. He says the sheep is the Aliba de Ben Nanas Loti Bailach. Don't even ask this question according to Ben Nanas, because he says the sheep is the main thing. And so therefore, since the sheep is the main thing, that the sheep is ma'akiv the bread, and so therefore the sheep can be brought without the bread. So for sure, you don't need to wave the second bread, according to Ben Nanas. It's only a question according to Rabbi Akiva, who says the bread is ma'akiv the sheep. The Amar Lechem Ikar says the bread is the main. What does he say? Kivin the Lechem Ikar by Tenufa. Since the Lechem is the main thing, we require a new waving. Oh, Dilma, Kivin the Matirin, Didei Kavasim Ninu, or do we say since the matir of the bread is when the sheep are slaughtered, well, it's Tenufa, we're not going to need to wave this bread, the second bread. So take it, it's unresolved. Amalei Abayo Rava, Mashna Shnei Kvasim, the Mekachi Lechem, Uma'akvi. What's the reason? So Abai asked the question, what's the reason that the two loaves, that the two sheep, which are brought as the shlamim, the Mekachi Lechem, that they are going to be Mekadesh the bread with their shlita, as the Gemara is going to say later on, that's going to allow them to be eaten. Uma'akvi, and they are essential for the bread. Once you do the shlita, that you can't wave the bread without them. Can't eat the bread, you have to start over. But what about, and those two sheep are the shlamim that come along with the two loaves of bread, but there is the 7 sheep and the bull and the rams, the 2 rams, that they're brought as an ola and they're not makadosh the bread, and they're not ma'akiv even after the shlita of them. Amar so Rava responds to Abai, Hova huska kuzel tenufa. Well, it's because they're waved together, meaning to say they need to wave the bread with the two sheep. Rashi says, do you wave them twice? Both. Ramam says the bread is waved once, but the sheep by itself is waved the first time. But anyway, since they're waved together, therefore, that's why there's a difference. And says, Vare Toda, but the Toda, they're not, it's not waved with the bread that the animal is not waved with the bread. But it's not waved together with the bread, but nevertheless, Makachim Akva, the Shlita of the carbon is with Makadish the bread. Ella Kitoda. So we're going to say that the two loaves of bread are like the Thanksgiving offering. Ma Tov the Shlomim, just like the Toda is a Shlomim, and that is what requires, that is what's Ma'akiv the bread of Hachinami Shlomim. So here also it's the Shlomim, the two sheep that are Ma'akiv the bread. The Gemara says, me dummy, it's not the same thing. Hasam Lekam Zvacham Achrina. By the Toda, there's only one animal that's brought, and that's a Shlomim. But Hasam Lekam Zvacham Achrina Badei. Hacha Deika Zvacham Achrina Badei. Here there are other animals that are brought along with it. Lik the Shuhani, Vahani. Let them all Lik the Shuhani Vahani. Let them all sanctify it. Hold on one second. So, okay. Hold on. Okay, so back in the so so the Gemara says, I don't know, I think I lost my line. So the Gemara says, but the Toda that they are lo huska kuzel zebetinufa and mekachim akva. So the Gemara says elaka Toda. It's like the Toda. Ma Toda is the shlamim, just like a Toda is shlamim. So here also is shlamim. The Gemara says, but it's not the same thing. There's no other karbanos by that are brought with the Toda. So the Gemara says hachadik liktishu hanivani ella. So therefore the Gemara says, what's the reason that only the kivsei shlamim are ma'akev and not the other karbanos? Elaka ayal nazir, compared to the ram of the nazir. Ma ayal nazir, which is the which just like the ram of the Nazir that is brought as a shlamim. Ma'ayel Nazir, and there are other animals that come along with it. There's a sheep for an ola and a kibsa for a chatas. So Ma'ayel Nazir afagav ika zvachim achrina ba'adei. Even though the ayel Nazir, there are other karbonos with it. Shlamim hu the mekadesh midi achrini lo. The shlamim is what mekadesh, but other things are not. Hachinami lo shna. Just like the ayel nazir, even though there are other zvachim that come along with it, the shlamim is what's mekadesh, but not the other animals. Also here, it's the shlamim that's mekadesh it. Gemara says v'hasamino, and how do we know by the ayel nazir that it's the shlamim that's mekadesh and not the other karbanos? How do we know that? The Tanya, because it says in the Brisa that the ayel says zevach shlamim Hashem al sal matzos. Should bring the ayil on the sal matzos. So the sal, the basket of matzos, the two types of bread that come along with the ayil nazir, that's required. That basically that it comes along with the ayil nazir. Shchitas ayil mekachin, and it's the slaughtering of the ayil that's mekadesh them. So therefore, if you slaughtered it with the wrong intent, well, kitchu alechem. The bread does not sanctify it. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, Shtei alechem habos b'fnei atzma. Let's say the two loaves of bread that are brought on their own, they're not brought with the sheep. And this goes according to Rabbi Kiva, which says that that you don't need the sheep in order to bring the bread. So let's say you just waved the two, you didn't have sheep, so you just waved the two loaves of bread on their own. Yunfu, so you wave them, but what do you do with them? Do you eat them or do you burn them? Because the slaughtering of the sheep is what will sanctify them. So ubar turasin, and then you wait for them to basically go bad. You wait for overnight, and they become disqualified being left overnight. And then the yatzu beis hasreifa, and then you take them out and burn them. So the Gemara says, "Manav shach." I don't understand. Ilach asyan lichlinu. If after you wave them, you could eat them, you let them eat them. Ilas reifya asyan. If you're supposed to burn them, let them burn immediately. Why do you have to wait overnight? So Rabba says, we're going to see many answers to this question. Gemara says, and really they could be eaten. And the reason why we don't eat them is we're worried that maybe that next year you will have you will find the sheep. We'll say last year we didn't eat the bread without the sheep. And you'll say that last year we didn't eat the bread without the sheep. And we ate them without the sheep. So for sure, even without the sheep. Achshav, nami nechot. So now we can also hold on 1 second. Meaning to say last year we ate them without the sheep. Achshav nami nechol. The inu lo yada, and they won't realize the mistake. Last year there weren't any sheep. So inu sharina nafshaya. So the bread was what permitted themselves. Hashadika kvasim, and now there is sheep. Kvasim hu desharilei. So the kvasim is what allows it. So it says Rabba and Amar Rabba. Rabba brings proof. Minami. How do I know this? T'nan Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Hey, ben Buch Rabbi Yavne. He testified in Yavne. This is from Mesech Shkolim. Kol Kohen sheshoko eino choteh. Any Kohen who gives the machatzis hashekel, also connection to Purim, is not committing a sin. That even though the Kohanim are exempt from the machatzis hashekel, you might have thought that therefore, since if they give a shekel, it's chulin, and so since you bring the karbanos from the shkolim, it'll be chulin by the azara. Nevertheless, they're allowed to do it. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, "Lo kiel kol kohen she'eno shokol." Any kohen who does not give the shkolim is committing a sin. Choteh. Because the Kohanim expounded a verse for themselves. Every mincha of the Kohen is supposed to be burned. Excuse me. And the Kohen said, and since there are communal offerings which we have to eat from, the Omer how can we eat from them if we contribute to them? And so therefore the Kohanim said that the Kohanim said the Kohanim thought to themselves, well, we can't eat, we have to eat from it, so therefore we shouldn't give. So he says, no, you're supposed to give. But anyway, when they say in this teaching, they say the 2 loaves of bread the Kohanim eat from. What is the 2 loaves of bread that it's talking about? It's talking about the 2 loaves of bread that are brought with the sheep. If you really want to say this, do you think that do you think that the Toda and the Lachme Toda are not something that the Kohanim can eat from? For sure they can. They're not considered a mincha. Elav, it must be Bos Bifnei Atzmon. It must be that the 2 loaves of bread that come on by themselves. And that's what they're talking about. And they said, how could they be in? So it must be that they're supposed to be in. So that's a proof for Rabbah they're supposed to be in. No, they come with the zevach. The lachme toda is not called a mincha, but shtei lachem ikru mincha. But these 2 loaves are called a mincha. As it says, "Ba'akrivcha mincha chadash al Hashem." As it's called a mincha chadash al Hashem. Rav Yosef says, "Olam l'streifa asyan." Rav Yosef says that it's really for streifa. It's supposed to be burnt. Rabbah said it's supposed to be in. Rav Yosef said it's supposed to be burnt. So if that's the case, why do we wait overnight? What's the reason why we wait overnight and we don't burn them? Because the sarfim, we don't burn kachim on Yom Tov, and so therefore you have to wait overnight. So Amar Abaye, Abaye says it's not the same case to burning the 2 loaves of bread that are brought on their own, burning disqualified kachim. In general, the kachim were disqualified. It's not the mitzvah. But here they did the mitzvah properly. We should be able to burn it. It's like the bull and the goat on Yom Kippur where you're supposed to burn. Elam Rav Yosef, what's the reason why we wait overnight? Maybe they'll find sheep later, and so therefore you wait. Okay, that's as long as it can be burnt, but as long as it can be brought. But after the Talmud Shal Bayin Rabbayim, we should burn immediately because you can't bring anything. So Gemara says, "My tuber tzirasi nami the katani." It means tzuras hakravasam. That's exactly what it means. What does it mean when it says tuber tzirasam? It means that you have to wait until it can no longer be brought, meaning once it's disqualified. And right after the carbon Talmud Shal Bein Arbaim. Okay, we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem. This is today's daf. Baruch Hashem.